it's fascinating to listen to the sales guys that you're talking to talk about how their lives have changed now, and the way engaging with individuals is different to what it used to be. I think it's Jeremy Cooper, who we used to work with at Salesforce. I think he said to me, he challenged me with that question one day, and I think I came back with a great marketing answer of something like, we are the custodians of the brand. Our job is to do this, our job is to do that, and we own this, that, and the other part of whatever. And he cut it down, and he just said, the purpose of marketing is to shorten the sales cycle.
Welcome to GrowthPulse, the B2B Sales Podcast, where we take a deep dive in the world of business-to-business sales and how you can get the most out of your investments in sales people, sales systems, and processes, the lifeblood of any thriving organization. Join us as we explore a range of topics, as well as speak to the industry's thought leaders, vendors, success stories, and people who've just won and failed along the way on their journey in business and sales. Before we get started, please do us a huge favor and click subscribe, follow, or like wherever you're watching or listening to us. Also, please drop us a comment that you've subscribed or any questions about the show. We'd love to get to know our audience. In today's show, we're talking to a long-time friend and colleague of both myself and Simon, Andrew Everingham. Andrew is the founder and CEO of Capital E, one of Australia's leading marketing program, events, and experience agencies. Their stable of customers is truly the envy of the industry, including brands such as Salesforce, ServiceNow, AWS, Google, Workday, just to name a few. We talked to Andrew about one of the most important topics in sales, lead gen. Specifically, how events have changed in the last few years and what the best organizations are doing today. We spent some time talking about how you can get the most out of your events and even jump into the topic of account-based marketing. So let's jump in. Welcome to GrowthPulse, the B2B Sales Podcast. I'm Dan Bartels. I'm joined, as always, by Simon Peterson. Simon, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, mate. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. And we are here with one of our very good friends, Andrew Everingham. Andrew, welcome to the podcast, mate. Thanks so much for your time and effort in joining us.
Hey, thanks, guys. Great to be here. Let me just say, love the podcast, love the format. I will say to anybody who's able to see the cartoon at the front end of this that it's not completely representational of you two guys, because your feet are definitely not that small. Although I do think you drink that much coffee. I got to be honest. So.
Well, mate, you know what? I've actually got to say I'm really excited that you're on the podcast today, because you probably recall, but many others won't know this story, that the tides have turned for once in my life, and now you are my guest at a recording event. And Andrew and I did a video when I was a customer of Salesforce's like 13 years ago. Was my very, very first experience in doing anything on sort of, I actually did something as a kid years and years ago, but in anything commercial being recorded. And I was that idiot that turned up with a striped shirt. And I had no idea that wearing a striped shirt on television just doesn't work, especially when they're going to put you on a green screen. And I walked in and just saw Andrew's face drop.
Yeah, you know what? It's actually quite a good little test about the fact that this whole podcast is about riffing on the spot, because had you reminded me of that, I would have turned up in a striped shirt today. Absolutely guaranteed, mate. No problem at all.
Love it. Oh, funny. So there you go, mate. Oh, it's 13, 14 years ago, I reckon that was. So, yeah.
And you know how much has changed in that time when you consider that really now having a striped shirt is not the catastrophe that it used to be, right? So technology's caught up. It's quite incredible to think. That's amazing. Great story.
Andrew, we obviously know you exceptionally well, but for all of our guests on the podcast, mate, I really want to sort of give yourself and Capital E a bit of a plug here. You know, I knew you initially as the head of marketing at Salesforce. I can't remember what your actual title was back then. Don't think it matters for all of us. But mate, look, what's your journey been today? And tell us all about Capital E, which is one of the leaders in its space in the Australian marketplace.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys. Well, it's a funny one. So Capital E's been around for about 12 years now, and I think that's frightening for all of us, right? Just as turning up in a striped shirt must be is a recollection of history. For 12 years to have gone past since I was back at Salesforce is pretty amazing. It's incredible to think what's happened in that period of time, and I think there's a lot of that's going to come up in this conversation today. You know, just what that journey's been like. So as a snapshot. We capitally are a B2B marketing and event management company. We specialize in the tech space. That I would say sort of 99% of our clients are in tech, which is amazing, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. But we're really about what we call creating engagement. Okay, and so what that really is about is connecting humans in a meaningful way with our clients around their products and services and what they most need to share with those people. And that's really, I know today's going to focus mostly around business events and how to look at making them successful, but that is all really resident in marketing, right? And we'll take a look a little bit today about what the purpose of marketing actually is. So it's been a great journey. I mean, I started out this little life as an actor. I was sure I was going to be treading the boards all over the world and maybe giving Mel Gibson a run for his money back in the good old days, and then quickly caught up with the fact that this doesn't translate particularly well to the small screen. So fell into working in marketing and just sort of loved it, to be honest with you. I loved the process of being able to align technology with what businesses and individuals really need. So it's been a great journey, and obviously that time at Salesforce was incredible. So
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so much has changed since that time we were both at Salesforce, mate. Even in terms of how companies look at getting their message out there, look at building pipeline, or actually running marketing campaigns. I know that's one of the big pieces that Simon and I are quite keen to talk to you about today. Really not just for the last 2 or 3 years, because that's changed the event space so much. But what are you seeing has really changed, over the last 5, 6, 7 years? Because so many Australian companies really are behind. They're not sitting on the cutting edge of what's happening from a marketing perspective. So what are you seeing that's really changing the marketing space today?
Look, obviously, the pandemic has had such a massive impact on business. It's almost redundant to talk about it in this circle, except for the fact that it's changed the way we do everything. Look at this. Like, would we have really launched the idea of doing a podcast a bunch of years ago? Probably not. I mean, in some of the conversations that you've had, I've spent some time watching the podcast, and it's fascinating to listen to the sales guys that you're talking to talk about how their lives have changed now, and the way engaging with individuals is different to what it used to be. It's people have got a different tolerance for what we do, right? So one of the things this all links back to, I think, is people often kind of mistake what, in my opinion, what marketing is all about, right? And I've worked with you two guys in multiple guises over the time, so you probably know when I say this to you. But if I was to pose to you, what do you think the purpose of marketing is? What would your response be?
I'll let you go first, Simon.
Put me on the spot. I think probably two things: make people aware of my brand, and engage them to, in a B2B sense, engage them to be actively looking at my product, move into a sales cycle, top of funnel, that type of thing. And I think get a good understanding of what the brand stands for, and know whether it's a problem I have that the organisation can fix.
Nice. What do you reckon, Dan? Got a good one?
Mate, I've got a really different view to this. I'm a view that marketers. And we actually spoke to Randy Littleson, former CMO at Nice and Conga. I don't think you've heard that yet. We get to press publish.
No. Yeah.
But he talked about it's more of a head of market, and I think it's about how does an organization look at building the opportunity for what they want to sell, and how they have this handshake with a customer set or a focus group on the problem they have and how we solve that with either a product or a solution, and then how we educate on both sides of the equation about that. And that educate piece is how you find leads, because you're educated that I want to buy from you, or you can solve my problem. Mm-hmm. I'm educated about the needs that my customers have and how I start to modify my products. So to me, it's marketers are about building a market and building an opportunity for everybody to come together to have a problem and solve a problem. That's my view.
Nice. I actually, when you said about that conversation, my mind was already listening to the one where you had about Daniel Lodge the other day, where you were talking about product marketers being the people that design, that help to design the product and help to create the market, right? So, and I wasn't listening to what you were saying. I was jumping ahead already. So, I think Jeremy Cooper, who we used to work with at Salesforce, I think he said to me, he challenged me with that question one day, and I think I came back with a great marketing answer of something like, we are the custodians of the brand. Our job is to do this, our job's to do that, and we own this, that, and the other part of whatever. And he cut it down and he just said, the purpose of marketing is to shorten the sales cycle, right? And I really like that. And I really like that is the way my organization takes a look at the stuff that we do. So whatever it is that we're doing, if we're writing copy, if we're producing an event, if we're producing some content, building a video, whatever it is this activity that we are undertaking going to make that sales cycle shorter? Right? Now, there's probably a place in there that you could also add, have we got the ability to influence the size of a deal as well, right? So there's probably a little bit of give and take in there. But why I said that is because I think despite the changes that we've seen, actually at the end of the day, that is still our job, right? Our job is still to look for a way to align what it is that our organization has and line that up with the needs of those organizations that are taking a look at what we do and see if the fit's there. And if it is, fantastic. And that's, I think there's a huge part for marketing to play in that. Now, the way we go to market now is so different. I mean, it just I think we're entering a really spectacular time. I couldn't be more excited about being in business right at the moment around AI. I think that what that's going to drive and the efficiencies and effectiveness that AI is going to drive for all of us is going to be incredible. Yes, I think there'll be some casualties along the way. I think that's probably true, but I think there's going to be some reframing about the way we think about educating our audience and the way the audience thinks about getting educated about the things that we want to talk to them about.
So Andrew, that's a kind of a good segue then into like AI really changing the way that we operate day to day. Events has changed so dramatically, and I see such an opportunity for organizations to think they can make things simpler with the use of AI, and then going off in these funny tangents with events and not really knowing how to get the best out of them. If we kind of just go back to the basics of like what makes a fundamentally good sales outcome driven marketing event for business?
Right. It's I think that's a complex question with a really simple answer, right? And then we can explode that from there. I think you've just got to know why you're doing it. And one of the things that I see so often is the production of events, or even the attempt at producing events, where no one really knows what the outcome is. Right? What are we actually setting about to do here, and how are we going to know what success looks like, and then how are we measuring our way to success? That's the other thing. So I do think that there are plenty of events which are delivered without that clarity, but I would say they don't necessarily do any harm. They're just maybe a little bit numb when you boil it down. But I think there's also events that are done without the care that are also quite detrimental on a number of different fronts, and we'll get to that. So, like, I think one of the things you have to do, and Dan talked about it the other day in the podcast, where he was saying about making sure that you have that alignment between marketing and sales. Unless you've got that alignment where the marketing team knows what the sales team need and the sales team can articulate where they're up to and what they're looking for, then you're going uphill from the very beginning, right? So what are we trying to do? We're trying to do an event. Do we want contacts? So we run an event, we get a couple of hundred people along to the event. Is that good for us? Is 100 contacts a good thing? Or is that just more trouble for the BDR team to have to crunch through for people that just came along for a free event? Are they leads? who knows? I mean, what's the definition of a lead in that particular instance? Shouldn't we know whether people who said they're coming to the event are a lead before they get there? And in that case, does that then inform the way we're going to engage with those people when they get on site? Are we looking for leads, or in what way are we going to be tracking that we are moving people further down that funnel? Right. So,
Yep.
are they going from a lead to an opportunity? Are we looking to take deals that are in play and grow them, or just move them further down that funnel? What are we actually out to do? And if we can work out how we're going to sort that stuff out from the beginning, that's the way to get everything on to the rails, and then make sure that we're actually going in the right direction. To the point that we've been approached plenty of times with people saying we're going to run this event, and when we challenge them and say, why are you running the event? What are you actually looking to achieve out of dropping? And let's be honest, it can be a lot of money, right? It's a huge part of your budget can be dropped on running a really nice event. When we've challenged it, it's actually worked out that there's a better thing to do than running an event. And that might not necessarily be with us, but that's kind of, if we know that we're going in as a partner with a customer to deliver an event, and we know that they're rock solid about what they're trying to do, then we can start reverse engineering it to deliver what's going to be a really quality experience for everybody that gives up their time to be there.
I know, Andrew, when we've talked about Dreamforce in the past, which for those who aren't part of this like Salesforce ecosystem is 170,000 people go to San Francisco once a year to drink from the fire hose of all things Salesforce. Dependent upon the time of year, that event changes dramatically. And what I mean by that, so typically in the Salesforce finish their financial year at a weird date, which is January 31. And like most companies, they have a big uptick at the end of financial year to try and get the deals in, get it closed. So if you've got if Dreamforce's date is November, end of November, it's never been the start of December, but sort of in that period, or it becomes a closing event. Right. If it's earlier in sort of September, now it's a lead generation event purely because of a time of year. And as a result, what everybody builds and the type of people will come to the event, like that, thinking about how you look at the event as a salesperson. And Simon, you and I have run a number of different Dreamforce investments for different organizations, Salesforce, and when we've run Financial Force and other companies afterwards, we went through that process. I mean, how did you think about that as a leader, looking at that spend, and it was big dollars that we spent as a partner at Gun Dreamforce? How did you think about that as a leader, looking at those different times of year?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think to Andrew's point, you've got to really think about what you want to get out of it. And I think you can oversimplify it. I think if you look at it just as a closing event or just as a lead gen event, I think you've got to be a bit more nuanced. I think you've got, if you run a later Dreamforce, you've absolutely got to be across which are the accounts that you want to be taking to that close, making sure you're answering questions, connecting them with senior executives in the business, et cetera. And that's all part of the close. But I think you've also got to have an eye on the next quarter as well. So while you've got one eye on closing the bigger deals, I think as a leader, you've also have to have another eye 1-2 quarters out. So you can't fall into the trap of just as a leader focusing on the closing event. You've got to have some leads that come in. But I think as a salesperson, you've got to look at the guests at the event and understand intrinsically who they are, what they need to get out of the event. And if they're in close mode, you take them down one path. And if they're in learning about your product, or does the product fit my problem, et cetera, it's a very, very different type of experience. But then I think you've also got to think about, Dreamforce is obviously one of these mega events, right? They get 150 odd thousand people. And I don't know whether that continues on into the future after COVID, but I've also looked at events in probably 3 categories. You've got, the mega event that, the global organization puts on. You've got a local country event where you're asking for hundreds of participants. And then you've got the smaller event, the more intimate event. And I think you really need to think about how you balance those 3 events. And I think to Andrew's point, ask yourself precisely what you're trying to get out of it. I think we've run a couple of events at, very intimate restaurants. And I think nice ones, we run at Aria. I think you organised for us, Andrew, and then one at Bentley in Sydney. And both those 2 events, I think we got a hell of a lot out of but they were much more intimate types of events. So it really depends, as a leader, depends on, you've got to ask yourself, I'm about to spend 20, 30K or 100, 200K, or, the mega events, 1 million, 2 million. Well, what do I need to get out of it? And I think it's tricky for a leader because you can't just look at one time horizon.
I'd agree with you on that, mate. And I think it's really interesting. When somebody will say to me, "What's the most successful event you've ever run?" It's so difficult to answer that question, because for that very reason, because the really successful events are the ones where the objective of the event and the result are overlapping, and even in some cases the result is better, obviously, than they were expecting. But I love those moments when I'm at an event, and it could be a round table for 10 people, or it could be hundreds of people at an event, where you look at your stakeholders and you can just see it in the eyes. They look at you and go, "Yeah, this is fantastic. Thank you." So if I look at one of the most successful events that I can call to my mind, is that was a round table at Rockpool. It was a visiting CTO, and it was the CIO of one of Australia's leading banks, and probably another 10 people around, and a couple of the staff from that organisation. And I stood in the corner of that room, and I just watched the light bulbs go on around the room, and you could tell that they were going to walk away from that event. Not only are the sales guys sitting there going, "This is amazing, we're going to have such incredibly deep conversations," but you could see the delegates, the attendees of that event, going, "This has changed the way I think. This has changed the way I'm going to go forward. This is going to make me incredibly successful." And I caught the eye of the CTO, and he just looked at me, and there was so much said without words, where it was like, "This is just phenomenal. What an amazing conversation." And the only way that worked is everybody in the room, from the client side, knew exactly what they were there to do. They knew exactly what they were trying to achieve by running that event, and everybody walked away at the end of the day going, "Tick the box. That's amazing." So having that real clarity from the outset is just so important. And then the details of how you deliver it, that's where organizations need to look at themselves and go, "Can we do that? Or do we need someone like us to step in and help them to do that?" And it's not always the case they do, right? You have to have that need. And if you do, then you should outsource that to the people that know what they're doing, right?
Yep.
Yeah, because I mean, you and I have seen so many different events. Simon and Andrew, you've helped us deliver some where we've designed phenomenal events, but if you don't have the right bums on seats, it's not going to work.
Right.
And this is where I think so many salespeople drop the ball, and sales leaders drop the ball on these events. That we ask for marketing to spend the time and the effort and the dollars to go and put these things together, and they get kicked over the fence to sales, going, "Hey, Q2, I've organised this phenomenal event, and you need to go and get the right people, but I've got some deals to close, and I'm off."
Right.
And we get to a week out for the event. And I mean, as a sales leader, it is always my biggest fear when you kind of sign these things off, that I'm back on my Rolodex a week out trying to fill these seats. And you're like, I don't know why I bothered.
Yeah, and you get to
I didn't need to have the event to organise dinner with a bunch of people that I already know.
Yeah.
So I mentioned before that there's that difference between something just not being successful and something actually being damaging, and in there lies some real tricks that I think organisations need to be really careful. So I think if you make a promise to somebody, then you absolutely need to keep that promise. And they are things like, if you are going to offer somebody a peer networking opportunity, so you're inviting CMOs to come along and sit around a table and have a conversation about how AI is going to change their department or whatever it might be, and they arrive and they're in a room full of marketing directors or marketing managers, you've just blown your integrity. Right. And I think they're the sort of things where if you're going to say it's bespoke for somebody, you need to deliver it. So when you're forced into a situation as a sales guy to go through that Rolodex, jump on the phone, just trying to get bums on seats, what's that for? What are the vanity metrics we're playing with there? Is that because it's seen as the investment of X thousands of dollars to book that restaurant or that function space is diminished by the fact that there was only 6 people there and not 12. Now, there's a need to be able to show momentum. I really believe in that. There's nothing worse than walking into an event with a great amount of lack, right? So, you've been in one of those that you walk into the room and you go, this feels cheap and nasty. And my expectations have not been met. That is the worst thing that you can possibly have. But if you've been invited to a roundtable and you walk in there and you go, oh, I expect there's going to be 20 people here and there's 6, that can be overcome if you're sticking to what you promised people, right?
Yep.
And you're actually still imparting that information. So there's some interesting dynamics to play with there between what you're promising and what you're not.
I think, Dan, just to ask you a question. Look, you've been a salesperson before you're a sales leader, and obviously very, very successful. What advice do you give salespeople? Their bosses just set up an event. They've been asked to invite some of their key prospects along. What's the best way to approaching getting your prospects in to these events?
My biggest criticism of salespeople and these types of opportunities is they don't own them. And what I mean by that is, if I've seen this 10 times, I've seen it 100 times. The event's been organised, it's been shared to the sales team, the customer success team, whichever team is actually delivering people to this event. At a team meeting, they haven't paid attention, they're on their phones, it's next week's job to deal with, and they just don't think about it. Instead of looking at it and saying, we're going to spend a whole heap of money to get in front of people in a more engaging environment than you could normally do by yourself. So how do I get my unfair share of that? Unless it's specifically organised just for me and my 5, 1 or 2 or 5 customers, whatever it is, it's typically organised for you as part of a group. Did you just grab it by the horns and own it and take an unfair share of people at the event? Mm-hmm. And for the salespeople that look back on their pipeline and say, oh, it's a bit dodgy going into the next quarter or the next half or whatever it is, okay, cool. That's just a representation of the effort you put in the time period before. For each one of those marketing events, how many invites did you send out? Because the reality is, for me as an exec, I don't get invited to that many events. And I probably have like an 80% attendance rate to when I am invited. So why are you not inviting them? Why are you making the decision for your customer before it that you should or shouldn't go, that they should or shouldn't go, or that it wouldn't be of their interest? That's the one that frustrates me the most when I've seen as a sales leader, or just for one of my colleagues, where they just haven't engaged with the event. Send out the invites.
Yeah, so picking up on that with you guys both, if I can ask you both this question. So to what extent do you think that the sales team's awareness of the purpose of that event in the attendees' journey is? So there might be a prospect, they might be an existing customer. How important do you think it is that the sales guys are aware of where this inflection point is going to happen in that journey?
We've all seen the marketing meeting where the marketing manager sits down and takes us through the next 3 months. Here's the marketing calendar. We've got all these wonderful events coming up. And I think I've seen a lot of sales AEs open their laptop and do their emails when that's being presented to them. So that to me tells me that they're not invested or engaged in the purpose of why they're running the event. So I think as sales leaders, we can better engage ourselves, because I've been guilty of that as well. Sit back, let the marketing guys tell me about the marketing calendar. So the point you raised around the purpose of the event, if that resonates with the salespeople, you have that alignment and the goals are mutual. I think the best sales guys get why you run events, but I think the ones that continually smash their number, they can see the event's purpose and then very quickly map it against their pipeline. What I don't want to see is just willy-nilly, I've got 10 customers in my pipeline, I'll just flick it out and see what happens. I think the best reps are very much engaged with the message. They're very much engaged with the purpose of the event. And then very quickly they can see, this customer is probably a little early in the cycle for that event, but this one's perfect, etc. So I think that engagement needs to happen at the time when marketing first talks about the events that are coming up. That actual conversation probably needs to be led by the sales leader. Let's have a think about why we're running the event, what types of pipeline activities, or whereabouts are your deals in the pipeline, and what maps to this event. And I think if that's done at the get-go, you then get accountability, engagement. And I think the most critical thing for both the sales leader and the marketing manager, when they leave that room, they're on the same page. They're agreed that there needs to be a lot of follow-up. Salespeople traditionally are very, very busy. They'll forget that meeting. So you need to continually go back and back and back and make sure that they're engaging. And I think it's not just about, have you sent out the leads yet? Have you actually thought about the right leads to send those invites to? Have you thought about the individuals and what they're going to get out of it? And please, for goodness sake, if you're going to send them an email, follow it up with a conversation. It's a great excuse to have a conversation with your prospect. Dan?
I take this with a different point of view. And I think salespeople get overly concerned about the type of content that is actually in an event. And they expect that there is genuinely different activities or content if someone is a stage 0 lead to someone who is at stage 5 and about to close. The reality is, for most of our customers, they don't know. They don't know how much information they're going to get from, this next presentation. Often the senior exec you're inviting to an event, or even the coach you're bringing along, they don't work for you. They haven't seen this content 4 bazillion times. They've seen it maybe twice. So the repetition of seeing the same piece of content a third time, our perception as salespeople is, I wouldn't want to see it again because, under no circumstances should I show them the same deck. It's like when you read a book the third, the fourth time, you get different information from it and you have a different experience when you read it, even though you know what's coming up in the storyline. And we think that people are not going to get value from talking to someone who's sitting beside them at an event, or talking to you again, or understanding with a greater nuance that same information they were delivered, but thinking about it at a different level. Why are we making that decision for them? Get their bum on the seat. The person who is invested in, I'm at stage 5, wants to know that when I sign the contract with you and you start to deliver, you're on the bus with me to make sure this is successful.
Yep.
The same as the person who's at stage 0 to move to stage 1 says, before I engage in this, is this likely to be a good journey? And when I get to stage 6 and I buy from you, will you be invested? Will it be worth the effort? Why are we presuming for customers that they won't get value? Why are we trying to overcomplicate whether it's a closing or a starting or a maturing event? Don't make that decision for your customer. Let them make that decision. That's my kind of viewpoint on it.
So I like what you're talking about, and I think you're right. I think as long as what people show up for and what you've told them they're going to get is honoured, right?
So sure.
I think one of the challenges that field marketers have is that there's so many programs are pushed down from headquarters, wherever that is, and thou shalt deliver this event, right? And so then they are forcing the sales guys to make sure that they get all those bums on seats to events, and they'll promise them a lot. I've been sent plenty of invitations which are, we have this VIP special event for you because you're the CEO of an organization and we're going to target in on this just for you. And then if you read further in the email, and we're going to talk to marketing people, the head of CX, we're going to talk to tech, and we're going to talk to, but it's all just one stream, right? And so you get there, and what you end up getting isn't what you're promised in the email, but a whole lot of sweeping vanilla motherhood statements. You never get deep into what you really want to learn about, or you might just get a fleeting part of that little bit. And I'm not saying that we have all the answers to all of these problems. But I think as long as what you turn up for, you get what was written on the packet. Because what can happen is if you don't, not only, and I'll give you an example. There's one, and not one of my customers, I'm very happy to say, the event just ran in the last few months, and people had turned up to that event. The majority of that audience were devs, and what they saw was big sweeping motherhood statements for which they have no interest. What they want to see is show me the code, rip the bonnet up, show me what this thing can actually do, and not at a glam, this is what sits on YouTube demo level. Show me how I can integrate this product into the back end. It's bottom up, right? That's what that audience is looking for. Now, you can say that they walked away from that event and went, oh well, that was a waste of my time. And let's be honest, if it's a couple of hours, well, it's 20% of your day or whatever, and worse if it's in the evening or you're outside of your true work time. And since most of us are spending part of the time at home, you've schlepped into the city or wherever the event is.
Yep.
The worst thing about that is that then when the right message gets to the right person at the right time in that organization, and they turn around to their dev to go, hey, Jenny, I just want to make sure that this is okay. That person goes, oh, I went to one of their events. It was pretty lame. And all of a sudden, you've made it harder for your sales guys, not easier. You haven't slipstream it. You've then put a roadblock in there. So I think as long as what you get when you arrive and experience that event is what you said you were going to be delivering or better, then you sweep.
Yeah. And
that's the only thing I'd say.
I think within that concept, though, and using your example of the dev, right, we get overly concerned that 12 months ago we showed the dev community this piece of information. We can't show it to them again next year. We're making a massive assumption that A, they were listening, B, they remember, C, they're not going to get a whole bunch of, it won't prompt a whole bunch of other conversations that need to come out of that. So we should start again. But it's, that piece doesn't necessarily, it's not what happens in reality because people go back to the same reference material all the time.
That's advertising 101, right? And you're absolutely right in so much as those core basic building blocks need to be repeated because that's your core foundation of what it is that you're offering, right? The incremental changes are the cream on top, right? And that's the thing that sometimes the core blocks, I know that stuff, but let's just go through that again so I'm level set with this. Now let me show you these cool little new features, new products, new services that we're able to offer on top of that. That's where I think that's where the friction happens, where people go, oh, okay, finally, after having sat through 3 of these before. And let's not forget that at most events, there's multiple levels of things going on. There's, yes, I want to hear about your information. I'm also interested in networking because this is my community, so make sure their community is there, right? But these are my peeps. These are the ones I want to communicate with. And most people are interested in it for themselves as well. They're like, well, what's my next step? What's going on in the industry? What can I learn from these other people? So there's multiple levels of, and run the right kind of event. It's just nice to go to. It's nice to be entertained. It's nice to be, able to socialize with people.
Have a bit of fun.
It's nice to have a community.
100%.
I think that's, we mentioned before, I would love you guys to talk about this. The best part for me of being part of the Salesforce community, and I don't want to harp on that in particular, but for such a long period of time was I had a group of people who I really enjoyed working with and spending time with, who I learned from and some I looked up to and some who were peers and some who I had seen their journey from BDR through to VP. And that becomes really important for people in their working careers and in what they do every day because we spend more time working than we do with our families, right? As things have changed, events have changed in the last couple of years, people's willingness to invest in events, particularly in Australia where we don't have the scale to really justify lots of these events happening all over the place. It's changed what they look like, and it's definitely changed what the communities look like. Are you seeing that, Andrew, and Simon? Are you seeing that in kind of your experience? I suppose, Andrew, are you seeing that for the events and people investing as well?
Without doubt. I mean, community is where it's at. In fact, the whole idea of bringing people together is about creating community. So if you're not considering the experience that people are having when they come along to hear your hear your message, then you're missing out on probably 75% of the value of the event, right? And I do genuinely feel what we're very focused on. I believe in fun. I think fun is really important, and it's not frivolous. Fun's actually an underlying tenet of our organisation. If it's not fun, we're not doing it right. I thought that was mine. I thought I made that up, but apparently Richard Branson came up with that. So he probably borrowed it from me, I'm sure. But that underlying idea of bringing people together and giving them an experience where they leave feeling better about themselves, feeling better about that, just that it was a great fun experience. I really believe that there's some really interesting psychology around events, and if you have people walking away having had a really good time and learnt a lot, aren't they going to remember what they learnt a lot better than having sat through something super dry, super boring, but really factual? I think that's critically important. And what community does, I think, community is the domain of an organisation that has a confidence around itself, that it's willing to allow people to connect in the wild. So, going back a long time, there was a very large technology company that I used to work with, who the last thing they ever wanted to do was to get their customers, their existing customers and prospective customers into the same room, because God forbid they should ever talk to each other, because we'd never sell another product, because they just tell them how bad things were. I mean, that time has got to have moved on. Now we want to bring everybody together. You want your partners, you want your customers, you want prospective, you want sometimes the media or whoever's going to contribute to that. You want to bring them all together, create an environment where everyone can share. Because if you can't do that, you're not confident in what you're really doing.
100%.
So,
yeah.
Simon?
Andrew, you stole my thunder there, mate. I was actually going to say the big change I've noticed.
Sorry, man.
Is really around that. Customers and prospects in the room together. I think, I've worked for a couple of very large software companies over my time, and I do remember the time, probably more so in the 90s than more recently, but the thought of putting customers and prospects in a room together was something that you would really have to take a deep breath before you did. And I think as I moved into the SaaS world, it was completely the opposite. I need my customers and prospects to talk to each other. So if you think, I think about an event I did recently, top of Sydney Tower, I think Westfield Tower it's called these days. We had we had probably about 70, 80 people there. And it was about 60-40 prospects to customers, but we needed to talk to our customers, reassure them they were on the journey. So the messaging they'd all heard before. For our prospects, they're at various stages in the cycle. They really need to hear the message. But I think the presentation side of that event by the vendor is less interesting in those sort of smaller environments than it is actually hearing from people talking about what they're actually doing. And as you mentioned before, partners in there as well. And, we had I think the proper term for it is a fireside chat. And I interviewed a couple of customers, completely different industry, and they talked about the journey. And I made sure in my questioning, implementing ERP, it's hard. Things go wrong. Tell us a little bit about, some of the things that you would advise your prospects to do that you possibly didn't do, or what you learned. And I could actually almost hear everybody leaning forward, because that's the real conversation they want to hear. So they walked out of that, they got a great feed, they were entertained, a hell of a view up there at the top of Sydney Tower. But honestly, when we finished it and finished the fireside, ran the networking, it was on. What was really interesting for me is, one of the comments from one of our customers wasn't. It alluded to a difficulty with a partner in terms of the implementation. That partner was sitting in the room. I can tell you one of the outcomes of that. The partner and that customer got together within 30 seconds of that fireside chat being finished, and there was a really good dialogue that happened. So you're bringing those sort of conversations in that you probably typically wouldn't get unless you got those people to an event. I mean, I can't imagine the customer and the partner having that conversation so openly. So, a formal Zoom meeting or an in-person meeting, etc. You put them in an event, the customer talks about what they would do differently next time. and immediately there's value for everybody in there. So those sort of events I love. The food was great, the view was great, etc. But my goodness, the conversation, and you could just see all the prospects leaning in, going, "Wow, this organization doesn't shy away from talking about doing things better, implementing better, being honest with its customers and its prospects around what some of the pitfalls are." Because implementing complex software is never a press of a button. There's a lot more to it than that. And I think bringing that out in an event was just fantastic.
Mm-hmm. That takes into account the point of view of the audience, though, right? And I think that's another thing that a lot of people don't do enough of. They don't think about. I mean, unfortunately, I think quite often content is like children. You love your own, even if you don't realize that they're rat bags and a little bit ugly. So it's there's times where you actually have to find a way to step back and say, if I was the invitee, would this be cool? Would I love that? Would I love this? Or would I be happy sitting in the audience looking at a PowerPoint presentation as somebody walks me through what's really important to them? Or would I rather hear from one of their customers talk about what a huge change it made to them? Or would I be more interested to hear from somebody that's talking about the most important new development around technology in my space, because what they're doing is educating me? Will I not trust them more that they were confident enough to get me in a room and just help to educate me to make me more successful? Who am I going to think of next? Am I going to think about the guy that gave me the chalk and talk, or am I going to think about the one that added that value to me? I think that's really important, that everybody always sits back and goes, would I come away from that event going, that was awesome, I love that, that was great, I'd love to come to the next one? That's the secret sauce.
It's all about empathy, right? You've got to put yourself in the audience's shoes. Right. It's an interesting one, teaching people about empathy, which is something I value highly as a leader. Really putting yourself in the shoes of the people you're coaching, mentoring, and in an event context, what are they sitting through? Are they going to learn something? Are they going to walk out with a smile on their face? Are they going to meet people they haven't met before? I'm curious, maybe Dan, how do you empathy, I find, is fundamental. How do you teach people about that? I think you've got a lot of alphas in leadership roles that tend to think a little bit more about themselves than the people they're trying to sell to or educate.
It's funny, as this conversation's been going on, I've just been thinking about that. How do you teach people, but in a different mindset, a different train of thought, which is, there's a reason salespeople of the current generation struggle with this idea so much. And it's a tax problem. It sounds odd, but the government, especially the Australian government, got away with the T&E expense tax deductions 25 years ago now. So the experience for people who were sales reps in these same types of roles 30 years ago, you were so used to running social events and having to give value for someone beyond just dinner, because if you're boring, I'm not turning up. Whereas now, that concept of social engagement selling, not social selling on mobiles, etc., but social engagement selling is they're in kindergarten. They don't know how to do it. Because there's no financial commercial structure that actually makes it worthwhile for the company to fund doing that. And it's only organizations, once you get past a certain size, that can start to justify reasonable spends on this. And it then means that in order to do it, more often than not, the only ones inside an organization who've got the budget to do it is marketing. Now I want to do it not just at that organic level where I can invite 2 or 3 people to an event. I can have a customer and a prospect all in the same room because you guys would get along and we have that conversation. And I learn to build that empathy. I learn to understand how to put the right people together and how to manufacture that conversation, because I've got to do it in a room of 25 people. Well, now I'm trying to manage 5 or 6 people at the same time and fill a table. And rather than just in a format like this, 3 or 4 people having a conversation and having empathy around, listen, I've had a really tough, you mentioned before, I've had a tough deployment of my delivery software, whatever it is, or what I bought from, I don't know, I've bought a power plant, the thing's not working, whatever it is, doesn't matter. That the customer vendor relationship is fundamentally the same no matter what it is you buy and sell. And how do you have that empathy for both sides? I think if you can't do it at a one-on-one level, it becomes super difficult to do it at a medium-term level with 5 or 10 people in an event.
Yep.
That's what I look at. I mean, and I could actually count on one hand the people that I know who are exceptional at building that sort of social event. And unfortunately, now in the business world, they're looked at kind of, ladies who lunch, so to speak. That's what it used to all be.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a really important part of that social engagement for people who drive core understandings of a customer.
Yeah, so Dan, I think that's pretty astute, actually, that observation, and I think I'm interested in whether the fact that kind of very much one-to-one social engagement maybe has given rise to so much interest in ABM. And I think ABM absolutely has its place within the marketing mix. I don't think it's the silver bullet for everybody, and I also don't think that the majority of people actually understand what ABM is about. But I wonder whether that desire to be able to get more personal and one-on-one with individuals within where they treat an account as a market itself, and then work out who the people are within the organization, and then go to them specifically and personally. I wonder if that's kind of born out of that challenge of not being able, or people not embracing that approach to developing relationships with the constituents that really matter for them.
Yeah, I think account-based marketing, for everyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, but
yeah, sorry,
is an interesting idea and concept, right? Because salespeople have always done account-based marketing, because at the end of the day, I'm standing in front and sitting in front of a singular customer. They don't really care what the marketing materials and the brochure look. I mean, you think about yourself when you go and buy your next car. I don't care what the ad said. I care if I'm married with an 11-year-old. I care if I can fit the bikes in the back, right? Mm. And if I can fit in my bikes, I don't care if the advert said it can fit bikes in the back. I care if it can fit and solve my problems. So salespeople have always done account-based marketing at that level, account-based selling, because the process forces you to do it. I think the challenge that people look at from account-based marketing being this panacea of solutions of how do I get greater cut through in a world where everyone wants greater customization and supposedly the tools can give it for you, is they're looking for all these dark web tools and things that can provide scale. If you don't have the capacity within your business to actually run 300, 400, 500 account-based marketing programs, then what you're actually doing is just selling in a different way. And you're being really selective around who it is you're going to spend time and effort trying to sell to this year. Simon and I did probably an execution of this 5 years ago when we looked at our business, and the year before had been an abject failure. We tried to scattergun for the entire region and it just didn't work. And we came back to our sales team. We had a sales team of 5 or 6 at the time. And we deleted territories was the first thing we did, which is in ABM world was like, what are you doing? And we said, guys, guess what? Your territory is the whole of Australia, but you got to pick 10 accounts. Everyone went, what? I said, you got to have 10 accounts and everything else sits in the pie. And when you're finished actually selling, speaking to them, having a meeting, building, if it's a one-on-one landing page that we need to do as a salesperson, you've connected with the CEO, CFO, when you've got to the end of the 10, want to put all 10 back in the box and pick up another 10? Not a problem. You know what happened? Nobody got to the end of the 10. And the other thing that happened was we crushed our number.
Right.
But the point being that the focus and the action that we did was what ABM desires to do, but it's trying to use all these mass tools to say, how do I do this as a marketing team at scale? Because I'm really trying to find that moderate point between, industry verticals or nuanced messaging of my product, or how I'm not going to build an individual landing page if I'm any company. I don't care if you're a two-man plumbing company or if you're Salesforce or SAP. You're not going to build an individual landing page for every single prospect. It just doesn't work. I mean, Simon, you lived and breathed that story with me. You know, what are your thoughts on that?
Mm. Yeah, so I would say it's definitely not a silver bullet. I would say it's got its place, and a little bit like CRM. Um, a lot of people don't do it well, right? So, and by that I mean they don't deploy it well. So, it is, as you say, it is in some cases it's thrown out by either the CMO or a regional head, and it's like we're going to now start doing ABM, and you know I would absolutely say there's a podcast here or a follow up with somebody who has done ABM extremely
Yeah.
well to show people what the difference is between marketing going, we're going to do ABM, let's get going, guys, and then the really successful deployments of ABM where sales and marketing are completely aligned, not dissimilarly to running great events, where they're both aligned in what the outcomes are. The expectations are set from the beginning. It's a slow burn. We're not doing it to try and generate 50 leads. We're doing it to take down an elephant, right? Terrible analogy. No one wants to take down an elephant. That's not what I'm really talking about. But it's about making sure that everybody knows what they're actually there to do and what their role is in it, because it is it is time consuming to do it really well. And if you do it really well, the results are fantastic. So there you go. There's your challenge. You've got an update. You've got to do another podcast, guys.
Yeah, for sure.
Not with me, but
on that topic though, it's an interesting. And from a salesperson, I think this is the question that an AE, a sales manager, a sales individual, should be asking of their organization. And if someone raises the concept of ABM or any marketing program, are we trying to sell to the people that we think are already in the market trying to buy our stuff? Or are we going to take an approach that says we want to go and sell to these organizations because we think that we will have the largest deals, the most profitable deals, the best fit, and they don't even know yet that that's what should happen? Because I think if it's the latter, ABM's a great fit. If it's the former, ABM's the wrong tool. And I don't think you have to have two distinct motions to do the two different things. And I think, unfortunately, so many organizations, particularly even if you're a part of a larger, overseas organization headquartered wherever, Middle East, US, UK, wherever you want to be, and we're in Australia, we don't almost have the resources to genuinely, or the size as a local organization to genuinely do that. We're still at that phase of, hey, I don't know, I'm selling ERP, I'm selling trucks. Everybody wants to buy a truck. I'll sell a truck to you. Not, do you know what? I want to go and be Linfox's largest supplier of electric vehicle trucks that can carry, 3 trailers. And I will do a $55 million deal with Linfox this year. Because that second motion is what ABM's designed to do.
Maybe when ABM gets put on the table, it's a great trigger for having the conversation as an organization. What are we actually trying to do? What? Because if it's seen as as we're wheeling in a solution, maybe we need to go back and look at it. So maybe it's ABM's about activating better management as opposed to account-based marketing, right? So maybe that's what it is. It's a litmus test.
I like that. With the leads.
Hmm. Yeah. Mm.
You got to stay the course, right?
Yeah, without doubt. And I think great ABM practitioners will tell you that from the start. Pure ABM agencies out there will say, don't even start if you're not, start as you plan to end, and you've got to stay the course. Otherwise, you're not really doing ABM, are you? Right?
Yeah. And you may as well, and again, you may as well not have started, because you just spun your wheels for X period of time and spent dollars. To your point, you haven't delivered to that group of people, that group of customers, the journey that you told them that you were going to take them on.
Right. And I would say that it's again, like I said before, with doing events and not really considering, and I don't want to paralyze people with don't do anything, because you might hurt relationships. But if you do ABM wrongly, you can damage the relationships with the most important people within those organizations that you're wanting to work with, because you've come on hot and strong at the beginning with all of this personalized, we're going to look after you, and then you go cold, and they're like, well, obviously I'm not important, right? So they drop you. It's the same thing as running an event where you promise one thing, you don't deliver what you know. That's what it's about. It's about honoring the promise.
Yeah, it's even to a company who wants to go down that pathway, making a commitment to the customer that the person running the account is going to be there for X period of time. Are you willing to hold on to that AE, that sales leader who's going to own government, own transport, whatever he's going to do? That's your person. That's your thought leader, because you start changing that person out mid, and look, people quit and leave and all that type of stuff that happens. But if the organization's the one coming in making those decisions, really? So you weren't actually committed to this. You weren't willing to genuinely build that person as a thought leader in order to get the outcomes, because that's a massive part of APM too.
I wonder whether the larger the opportunity, the more that lock-in and commitment's required too. Because if you're talking about a significant deal size, you want to have consistency as the buyer. You want consistency of experience, and you want to have a level of trust with that organization. And people buy from people, so they're going to be Yes, you're right. People swap out and change, and in some cases that can be an improvement. Let's be honest, but but people want consistency. Yeah, I would agree with that as well.
Well, Andrew, we're getting long in the tooth here on our time, and I'm sure you've got a busy day, and I know you're off on holidays next week, which is super exciting.
It's a tough job.
Yeah, tough job, mate. Before you can think of us while you're sunning yourself on a beach in Fiji. So, mate, but before we wrap up, we often ask our attendees, our guests, a couple of key lessons, couple of key pieces of advice. Marketing, lead gen, and events are critical for the growth of any sales organization. What's the couple of things you'd leave people with on the way out?
So I would say knowing your audience, right? Definitely is really critical, and I think a lot of marketers are quite prepared to be generalists about their audience, not get right down into the weeds and really understand them. Simon, your comment before about empathy is just so critically important. Understanding what's driving your clients is absolutely critical. I would say accountability when it comes to the work that you're doing is critical. There's a lot of places to hide, and that's not really going to do anything good for anybody if you can hide. And then more generally, like I said earlier, just keep it fun, right? Let's keep it fun. Levity is a great weapon in our arsenal as marketers and salespeople. So make sure that every morning you get up is one where you feel fantastic about going in and doing what you need to do for the day. So that'd be my tips.
Well, exceptional. Andrew, Simon, thank you so much for joining us today. If you've made it this far on the podcast, we absolutely appreciate you listening. Please don't forget to, if you're on YouTube, please click subscribe, like the video. If you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your audio stuff, please give us 5 stars. Follow the podcast. We would love to hear from you. So if you want to drop a comment, that'd be amazing. But for everybody, thank you so much for joining us, and we will talk to you all next time.